If you are 5 years away from retirement right now, you are standing at the most dangerous point in your entire financial life. Not because something has gone wrong, but because the next 60 months will either lock in decades of freedom or quietly set up mistakes that compound for the rest of your life. And the problem is most people spend this window doing the exact wrong things. They coast. They assume the hard part's behind them. They think hitting a number means that they're ready. But retirement is not about approaching the finish line. It's about learning an entirely set of new skills before you need them. And 5 years is barely enough time to get it right. Hi, I'm Chris Sagan, certified financial planner at Puzzle Wealth. And I've spent years helping people navigate this exact window of time. And what I found is that the clients who use these 5 years strategically often feel more prepared for retirement. Those who coast frequently face more uncertainty when the transition arrives. So stay with me because what I'm about to walk you through is not generic advice. This is the specific work that I do with clients in this exact window, and it's the difference between retiring ready and retiring scared. So let me start with something that's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. You probably have a number. Maybe it's $1 million. Maybe it's 2 million. Maybe your advisor ran a Monte Carlo simulation and told you there's a 92% probability of success. And that number feels like the goal. Well, here's the problem. That number assumes things about your spending, your taxes, your social security timing, and your healthcare costs that have never actually been tested against your real life. I've seen people with $3 million that are terrified to spend a dime, calling me anxious every time the market moves. And I've seen people with $800,000 traveling, enjoying their grandkids, completely at peace. And the difference is not the number. The difference is whether they built an income plan or whether they just accumulated assets. So the real question you need to answer in the next 5 years is not how much do I have? It's this: can I replace my paycheck with a sustainable income that lasts 30 years or more? That requires knowing your actual spending, not a guess from 5 years ago. It requires understanding your tax situation in retirement, which is totally different from your tax situation today. And it requires stress testing what happens if the market drops 30% in a year, because historically, that happens more often than people think. If you can't answer those questions clearly right now, the number on your statement is just a number. It doesn't mean you're ready. If you're watching this and realizing your plan has gaps, that's exactly what I help people work through at Puzzle. I will run the real numbers on your situation and show you what your actual retirement picture looks like. The link to book a time with me in my calendar is in the description below. Now, let me talk about taxes, because this is where I watch people miss meaningful tax planning opportunities without ever realizing it. Here's the situation most people do not see coming. When you first retire, your income drops, and for a window of time, your tax rate might be the lowest it's been in decades. That feels like a win to you, but it is actually your last real opportunity to act, because Social Security is coming. Required minimum distributions start at 73. Pension might be kicking in, and suddenly you're back into that higher tax bracket with zero flexibility and no moves left. The 5 years before you retire is your window to start shifting money from pre-tax accounts to Roth accounts while you still control what hits your tax return. It's your chance to harvest capital gains at lower rates, or maybe to bunch your deductions together into certain years, to run the kind of forward-looking projections that answer the questions like, when do my RMDs push me into a higher tax bracket? And what does my tax situation look like if my spouse passes before me? That last one matters more than most people realize. I've seen surviving spouses move from the 22% tax bracket to the 32% tax bracket on the exact same income that they're receiving, simply because their filing status changed. That kind of planning becomes much more difficult after retirement begins. The moves have to happen now, in this window, while you still have options. Here's where it gets even more complicated and where 5 years out starts to feel very real. If you're retiring before 65, you have a health insurance problem to solve. Healthcare subsidy rules can change, so it's critical to model your coverage costs under current laws rather than assuming today's subsidies will always be there. What that means practically is that your Roth conversion strategy, your withdrawal strategy, and your healthcare costs all have to be planned together as one coordinated picture. I've seen people take more income than expected in 1 year and unintentionally increase their health related costs simply because nobody showed them how those pieces were connected. This is not three separate decisions. It's one decision with three consequences. And even if you're retiring right at 65, you're not done. Medicare has its own income trap called IRMA. If your income 2 years before Medicare enrollment exceeds certain thresholds, you pay significantly higher premiums. Decisions you make at 63 affect what you pay at 65. Decisions at 64 affect 66, which means you need to be managing this now, not the year you retire. Let me ask you something about Social Security, because I want to push back on the advice you've probably heard. You've been told to wait until you're 70 to maximize your benefit. And mathematically, the monthly check is larger if you do wait. But here's what a maximize your benefit conversation almost never includes. If you delay from 62 to 70, many retirees need to fund some or all of that gap from other resources. And depending on how those withdrawals are structured, that can meaningfully increase sequence of return risk during the most vulnerable years of your retirement. That money's no longer compounding, and you've taken on real drawdown risk at exactly the wrong time of your life. When you run the full math, including the time value of what you gave up, the break even on delaying Social Security depends heavily on your health, your other income sources, your portfolio size, and what your spouse's situation looks like. For some people, waiting absolutely does make sense. For others, claiming earlier may be more appropriate based on their specific circumstances. There's no universal right answer, but what I can tell you is that 5 years out is when you need to be modeling this, not guessing. Because once you claim, you can't go back. There's one more thing I need to talk about, and I think it might be the most important thing in this entire conversation. I've watched people execute perfect financial plans and still end up miserable in retirement. For 30 or 40 years, every instinct that you've built into your brain is about accumulation. Save more, grow the number, protect the principal. That's what discipline looks like during your working years. But retirement requires you to completely reverse that instinct. You have to learn how to spend, how to draw down your assets, to watch your balances decrease, and trust that it's working the way it's supposed to. And that is genuinely hard for people who have spent decades doing the opposite. I've met retirees who have spent decades building wealth, only to struggle with using it once retirement's arrived. Not because they lack the resources, but because they spent so many years focused on accumulating. That made spending feel uncomfortable. They skipped the trips. They said no to the experiences. They held back from the people they loved because they were terrified of a number going down. That's not freedom. That's a prison you built for yourself out of everything that you've worked for. The 5 years before retirement is when you need to start practicing the shift, not just financially, but also mentally. Start treating your money as a tool for living rather than a score to protect. And get honest about what you're actually retiring to. Because if you do not have a real answer to that question, the first 5 years of retirement will be spent figuring it out while your health and your energy window quietly closes. 5 years is not a long time, but it is enough if you use it right. The income plan, the tax strategy, the healthcare coordination, the Social Security decisions, the mental readiness to actually enjoy what you built. None of that happens by accident, and none of it can wait until the moment you retire. If you want to sit down and map out exactly what the next 5 years should look like for your specific situation, book a time with me. The link directly to my calendar is in the description below. I'll show you where the gaps are, what the moves are, and what retirement actually looks like when you go in Ray. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. And please press subscribe for more information from me. Thank you.